exactly are containers? All right. So I'll be in this video, in this short video, I am quickly going over a bunch of things, all right, to get you guys up to speed on what's coming, to get you guys prepared for what's coming, all right. So one thing is containers and virtual development, right? So this is something that you and I are going to do a lot, all right. We are going to be dealing with a lot of containers, and so when we get to Docker and containers, I'll obviously explain it once again. But for now, I'll just give a quick intro as to what containers is and as to what virtual imaging and virtual machinery is, all right. So now containers. Let's say you have an application, all right. So now what's a very basic application? Let's just take a Python pandas application, all right. So pandas is a Python data science library. So you have an application that requires pandas, all right. So this is a Py application. Inside this application we import pandas, all right. So this is some sort of an application which requires pandas, and it has some data to it, like it has some external data, like it has a CSV file that is passed to it. So now, if you guys don't know what pandas is, what Python is, and then what CSV is, I will be dealing with what Python is. I'll be showing you guys a few basic, Python libraries, because even as a DevOps person, you need to have some sort of a basis, some sort of a ground to stand on in terms of development, because that is the only way you can, truly understand what the developers are doing. Because if you don't know what dev is, DevOps is going to be really hard, right? So yeah, I'm not saying just abandon this and go learn dev first, but it's a really good thing to have it, all right? And through this course, I think we will be looking at some of the dev thing. Like I'll be teaching basics of Python, I'll be teaching basics of different runtimes, all right? So let's just say there's an application, all right? You run it locally, you have your Python, and then which requires pandas, and it has an external dependency, which is a CSV file, all right? Now, the thing is that Python can be of many versions. Pandas can be of many versions. All right, I'm just going to put a V here. This can be of different versions. And then the CSV file obviously can exist anywhere on the earth, or anywhere on the digital earth, digital world. All right. So if you want to recreate this environment, what happens is that if you want to actually take this code and run it on someone else's machine, it doesn't really work, because they don't have the same version of Python. They don't have the same version of pandas. They may not have the CSV file. So what you do is the concept of containerization. All right. It's a way of normalizing environment for running code. All right. So you take this container, you can imagine a container to be a literal container. All right. So it can literally be a container which contains things. In this container, you put your Python, and then you specify exactly which Python version you want to put in. And then you put in pandas, and you also include your CSV file. So this becomes a well-packaged, a well-bootstrapped, container, which has everything that is required. Now, what you can do is you can basically take this container and run it on anyone else's machine. All right. So along with the code, they also get the Python version, they get the pandas version, they get the proper CSV file, and they can just run this container directly. They don't need to install anything. They don't need to have any external dependencies. And so you can just containerize everything. Now, this is useful in two cases. The first case is, I'm just going to write the, okay. So first case is when you are working with a team. All right. So in a team, people have different computers, right? So people have different computers. So they might have different versions of Python, different versions of pandas. So having containerization is a good way for a team to actually work, right? So they can just write a Docker file and everybody runs the same environment, right? So they basically run the container, the container has the same environment. This is really useful in a team. The other useful is when you run it on a server, right? Because on a server, there's nothing there. You are supposed to put everything there. So instead of just installing the specific version of Python, installing the specific version of pandas and then CSV, what you can do is you can basically just take this container and then run it on the server. Now, for now, I've only said stuff in basic English, right? Take, put, run, right? Now, this doesn't actually mean anything. Now, if I ask you to actually do this thing, implement this thing, you wouldn't be able to if you don't already know it. All right. So actually creating containers, running them, adding Python, adding pandas, adding CSV, and moving it to servers, collaborating with your team using GitHub, all of this will be taught in the upcoming lessons. All right. So yeah. right now I've only spoken in basic English, then we'll get into the technical aspects of it. All right. So for now, we've looked at two of the most important things for a DevOps engineer. All right. Let me create a logical separation here, right? Because this is mostly theoretical, and this is where the actual stuff starts. All right. The third one is cloud providers. Now, in the past 10, 15, 20 minutes, I've spoken a lot about servers. All right. So, like I said, in almost every diagram, I've included something and I just call it, it's a server, it's a server, this is a server, that's a server. Now, what exactly are the servers? Well, they are something that are hosted on a cloud environment that is used by everyone. A server can be defined as a piece of hardware or metal that is used to run a workload and that can be accessed by the appropriate people. And mostly the appropriate people happen to be the general public, but it can basically be anyone. All right. So a server can be of a few types. Like you can just create a server in your home, right? Like I'll explain it here. So you can just create a server in your home, all right, and then you run it. But the problem is you can only run it in your home because your home server, because your home, what do you call it, local machine, your PC is not actually accessible by everyone on the internet, all right. So what do? You run it on a cloud provider. So these are people who actually, now I mean, even in a home server you can ask your ISP to give you a public IP address and do this, all right. But this is a quite tedious process. It includes a lot of risks and mitigations and what do you call it, a lot of formalities, all right. And it's also really what do you call it, cost expensive, all right, because well you need to have a actual machine running. But to actually outsource all of this, to do all the what do you call it, the hardware aspects of things, like setting up a CPU, setting up a RAM, setting up storage, you can what do you call it, you can offload that work to a cloud provider. Now a cloud provider's only aim is to provide you services, all right. These services can be of different types. Now let's look at these services provided by a cloud provider, all right. So a cloud provider provides servers, right? So you can basically run anything on it. It's basically like your own machine. You can run anything on it. A cloud provider will give you the IP address that people can access it. A cloud provider will also let you access the DNS. All right. What DNS is exactly, we will get into it later as we go on. I do have a proper section for just networking, and during the networking session, I'll explain about servers and IPs and DNS. All right. And then what else do they do? They give us databases, right? So they give us databases. And then what else do they do? Database is obviously very simple, right? You basically store data there. And then what else do they do? They provide runtimes. They can actually give you places to run your code directly instead of having servers. So that's called serverless applications. All right. And there's so much more. All right. Like, okay. So one thing I'll quickly mention are the different types of cloud providers. Not types, the most famous cloud providers. All right. AWS, the most famous of them all, Amazon Web Services. And then you have Azure, which is the Microsoft Azure. All right. So it's given by Microsoft. And then the last one is GCP, Google Cloud Platform. All right. So AWS, Azure, and GCP, I'm just guessing. I'm going to give you guys a few numbers here. It's just my guess. Hold around 99% or at least 95% of the entire cloud market share. All right. Anybody, any developer, any company, any business, any school, any organization that uses clouds will almost exclusively be on these three cloud providers. Why? Because, well, they are the big giants and everyone uses them. It's like Android and Apple. You can assume almost everyone uses that, right? So yeah, in this course, we'll be looking at AWS. Why? Because in my personal experience, AWS happens to be really reliable. It's really fast, and it's just generally good. Like other two are great as well, but for a beginner, for learning stuff, AWS is quite extensive, so it's also beginner friendly. And yeah, so in this course, I'll be using AWS. All right. Everything that I talk about cloud providers, everything that I talk about DevOps related is going to be from the perspective of AWS. Now you may be thinking, okay, what about Azure and GCP? Do I have to learn that separately? Well, yes and no. All right. Yes, in the sense that, yeah, you should, log on to Azure, you should log on to GCP to actually learn it, but not really, in the sense that they are quite similar in the services they provide. All of the services that you see right here are identically present in all three cloud providers. All right. So you don't need to worry. If you know something really good in one of these cloud providers, then there's a good chance you know it in all three cloud providers. All right. So in this tutorial, we'll obviously be using AWS, and then, well, we'll be using AWS, and I'll show you guys how, what goes where. All right. So now, having said that, what's next? We've looked at cloud providers, and then the third thing is scripting. All right. So I'm just going to call it scripting, and little bit basic dev. All right, like I want to make a what do you call it similarity. I want to establish a similarity here. Scripting and basic dev. Okay, what exactly is this? Well, you see, scripting. Well, obviously Bash. Okay, I'll explain what Bash is. All right. So scripting is you basically write scripts. Now, scripts are basically a bunch of it's like a text file, all right, which you define to do something for you, all right. So now, for example, in let's say a script in 300 years ago, right, you write a bunch of things, all right. You tell your gardener to go pluck some fruits, and then you tell him to take the fruits, put it in a basket, and then you ask the cook to take the fruits from the basket, peel it, and then serve it to you, all right. You write it in plain English in a paper, and then your gardener would look at it and be like, okay, you know what? This is my role. I need to go and pluck the fruits. And then the cook would be like, okay, I'll just wait for this guy to pluck his fruits, and then I'll peel it and serve it to whoever asked for it, right? So this is a script. This is obviously written on a piece of paper. Now, imagine the same thing with computers, all right? Where the gardener and the cook are different technologies. These are different entities, all right? These are different parts, or these are different moving parts. These are different softwares. And the script is the, what do you call it? Is the actual text which you tell the gardener or the cook, or in this case, the software, to work upon. All right. And there are obviously different scripting languages, and the most famous of them all, the most commonly used of them all, and the one that you will require the most is Bash. All right. So now Bash is a born again shell. I think that's the born again shell. Yeah. So that's what it's called. Now, a Bash shell. All right. I'll explain to you guys about what is shells and what is a bash shell, and then what are different types of shells. Z shell, I think there's a F shell as well. There's fish, and there's just a lot of shells, all right? But bash is the most basic one. It's the most common one. I'll be explaining to you guys about this in the next one, I believe. So the next one is going to be about Linux. And at that time, I'll explain to you guys what is bash, how to write scripts in bash, and so on, all right? Now, as a DevOps person, you should not be the person that says, oh, you know what, I'm not going to write scripts. You know what, I'm not going to do some basic dev work. Because as a DevOps person, dev is still a part of your thing. So you should at least you should have at the very least a basic knowledge of how developers do things. All right. Now, having said that, scripting. So Bash is one of this thing. The other thing is Python scripting. Python is obviously a really great scripting language, right? It's obviously a programming language, but every code in Python can be considered as a script, all right, because it's not compiled as compared to other programming languages like C or Java. You can basically just say, you know what, take this directory, change the file name, and then put it there. Like, it's very simple, all right? You do that in Python. And in this course, obviously, I'll be teaching you guys about basic Python as well, all right? Because it's assumed that as a DevOps person, you have some sort of an idea as to how code works. You have some sort of an idea as to how logic works, and as to how dependencies are met, and so on and so forth, all right? So these are the scripting languages, Bash and Python. So what have we looked at thus far? We've looked at what CI/CD is, which is basically taking stuff, putting it on the server. And then we looked at what container is, which is basically recreating and cloning an environment for code to run on. And then cloud providers, these provide you different services that a DevOps person uses, and a DevOps person should be familiar with cloud providers. And then the latest thing that we saw is scripting and basic developer. And then the last thing is configuration management tools. All right. So now, if you're new to DevOps, this is going to be very new to you because, well, this is quite unlike most of the other things that we've seen before us. These configuration management tools allow us to, like, in the last 20 minutes, right? I believe I've said a lot of things about taking stuff here, putting there, all right? The things that actually facilitate this, the place where you actually go and dump this, like yeah, sure, if you've written a Python script, but you need something to run that Python script, right? So these tools are what actually do this for you, all right? So Ansible is one of those scripts, and we'll be talking about that. All right, Chef is another CI/CD pipeline thing. All right, I'm sorry. Yeah, Chef is also another one of a configuration management tool. And then what else we can think of? Nginx. Nginx also has configuration. All right. So as a DevOps person, you should be able to look at a software. You should be able to look at something and say, okay, you know what? This is where the settings are. I'm gonna go tinker with it. This is where the configuration lies. I'm gonna go make some changes to it. I'm gonna make it customized to myself. All right. So we'll be looking at a bunch of configuration management tools, and yeah, I don't really want to get into it as in depth right now because obviously it's a huge topic and we have a dedicated video for it. All right. So I think that's about it for the introduction to DevOps thing. All right. Quick summary. The first three things have been quite theoretical as to what is DevOps, and then objectives and software and how it works, and then a few technical details as to what you guys can expect in this upcoming course. All right. So this has been introduction to DevOps. Please